Verities and Balderdash. During a recent visit to the UK, Harry Chapin spent an afternoon at Radio 1 chatting about his work and music with Noel Edmonds.
As I say at school, what is your name? Is it Chapin? 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 I mean, I've heard so many different versions of it. We ought to establish that to start with.
Well, my name is Harry Chapin, and it actually came, it came in 1066 with the Norman invasion of England. William the Conqueror had a lackey somewhere in the lower realms of his force, and his name was Chapin. And over the years it became anglicized to Chapin. Mm-hmm. And Deacon Samuel Chapin, a guy in 1637 who was out of favor here in England, went over to America and founded Springfield, Massachusetts. And I'm a direct male descendant from old Deacon Sam. As a matter of fact, the only other two famous members of my family were Ezra Chapin, who was the first guy ever to be executed for incest in Massachusetts history, and Dwight Chapin, who was the guy recently put in jail as one of Nixon's, more enticing, crew. So all in all, I've got a tremendous legacy to live up to.
I've got to be fair. What about the other Chapins? I mean, what about the present family setup? Where were you born?
Well, we were all New Yorkers, really, born and bred, and I've come from. I got 4 real brothers, and then a whole bunch of half brothers and half sisters. Between my mother and father, they've had 12 different kids in various, combinations and permutations. I'm not Catholic either, surprisingly, but basically East Coast, United States, around New York area. I grew up on West 11th Street down by the docks, right in between a maximum security federal penitentiary and the M&M Trucking Company, which on odd moments at various nights used to back into our house. And indeed, 3 months after we moved out, when I was 11, a truck backed into the house and it fell down. So had that kind of upbringing. But, really, the thing that was extraordinary, you always hear about these poor little rich boys, people that grew up in tremendous financial security and all kinds of worldly goods, but very little love, and they sort of become raisins instead of grapes, Well, I was a rich little poor boy. I grew up in an environment of writers, painters, teachers, musicians, philosophers, filmmakers, poets, sculptresses, in Greenwich Village, at a time when this was before even the whole burst of folk music made it world famous. It was a tremendous, wonderful family neighborhood. And that time, the specific area I lived in was part Irish and part Italian, but an awful lot of writers and artistic people lived in that environment. And so all I could say is I probably had one of the most privileged upbringings of all time, in the sense of excitement and kinds of examples of people who are asking interesting questions about their lives and the lives of people around them. I Want to Learn a Love Song is the song about how I met my wife. I was giving her guitar lessons. I sort of telescoped the time a little. We didn't have our first encounter on the couch, but she was just splitting up her first marriage, and was trying to do some new things. I think it's a sensible thing when you're breaking up some old situation to try to have some new inputs. She didn't realize that how much of a new input I was going to be, but I, after a while, realized what an incredible woman she was, and stopped charging her the $10 an hour that I talk about. And I would have to say it's been the best decision of my life. And indeed, the lyrics of Cats in the Cradle come from a poem of hers that was zinging me for running around the country worrying about being successful and not enough about the kids. So I've got a distant early warning system who's very close to me, who happens to be, whenever Harry Chapin gets off in some crazy situation, gives me a kick in the pants.
What does money mean at the moment? I mean, you're in an industry where people are reputed to be earning vast sums of money. You come from a country which is supposedly very, very wealthy and the land of opportunity. What does it mean to you and your family?
Well, this year I'll be giving away $700,000 of stuff that I've earned through benefits.
When you say giving it away, does that mean you're turning your talents to earning the money, or has that money once been yours?
Well, Well, it just depends. On a tax situation, I'd be crazy if I actually took it myself and then...
Right.
But when you do a benefit concert, and I probably do more than anybody else in the United States, let's be very clear. It would be nice to think that people came there because they were concerned about starving children or lobbying for a better, saner energy policy or ecology or various political candidates or any of the many things, diseases that need some money invested to solve them. But in fact, they come for the performer.
The benefit concerts, charity concert, whatever, isn't sort of that big over here. We have a few, but you're almost making it sound as if there is a tour, there is something going on all the time. That's quite a claim. You do more than most. Can you explain a little bit about the scene?
Well, I think I'll go one step farther, and because I'm proud of it. I do more than anybody. The only, of course...
Why?
Well, number one, when people ask me why I'm involved in things like this, I say very clearly that we are a participatory democracy in the United States and here in England, and the idea is that we're not supposed to just vote every 2 or 4 years, that all of us on a consistent basis are supposed to be actively involved as public citizens, not just voting every 2 or 4 years, but armchair experts on virtually everything. And the genius of our society is collective. And we've gotten away from that. We really have. And I think that anybody, be it a disc jockey or a singer or a producer or a farmer or a housewife or a teacher or a student or a businessman, all of us have to ask ourselves, and the key line, I think, was written by a gentleman named Robert Zimmerman in 1964, Bob Dylan. It was called the song I forget, I think, I'll just give you the line. He who is not busy being born is busy dying. And to a really true extent, I would say that we are, in many cases, in our both respective societies, much more imitating the last years of the Holy Roman Empire than busy being born. The whole concept that I'm sort of working on this year in 1977 as we wind it up is that of the dance band on the Titanic. I think, frankly, our respective industries right now are functioning like the dance band on the Titanic, which is to create diversions in the ballroom so that nobody worries about the icebergs outside. And the introduction that I do when I do that song live is very... I'll just do it. It is 1912. We are in the British Isles. It is April the 12th. And the triumph of technology. The first time man has conquered nature. The unsinkable vessel is about to set sail. And you are there.
Are you a prophet of doom? Is the end nigh?
Oh, no, not at all. But I think that the answer is we definitely need lookouts. Art, at its best, has had an ability to sensitize, to emotionalize. See, music should not propagandize. An awful lot of great writers during the 30s in America, during the Depression, wrote Clifford Odets, Maxwell Anderson, wrote propaganda art. Stunk. Really boring as hell, because it means the characters become in service of ideas and they don't follow through. But I think music has the ability to emotionalize things. And I mean, a song that doesn't sound political, Cats in the Cradle. Just imagine if it's about a father and son, as some of you may know, and then I know you know. And if I'd done that as a propaganda piece, it would be, fathers, pay attention to your kids, or else they won't pay attention to you. And it would have been a goddamn bore, right? But done on an emotional basis, not from me being in a more noble, enlightened position than anybody else, but being, in a sense, the fool that all this is happening to, being blind as it unfolds, that freshly, emotionally implanted a truth that was already there, or re-implanted a truth that everybody knew, but put it in such a way that I got 175 separate letters from clergymen alone about that song, saying that they used it as a basis for sermons in the United States.
A child arrived.
Why exactly? I'm interested to know why you bother. Not in a actual physical sense. I mean, not in the sense that you use energy to go to places and do concerts, but the songs, whether they're about the man reaching the point where home life isn't right and he fancies his secretary, or Mr. Tanner gets the big opportunity, or even the chap whose brakes fail and he's a banana split. I mean, it's all about individuals. It's all about the problems of life, which we can read about in newspapers. Why do you care so much about it? Why don't you get on with living Harry's life?
Well, frankly, I think the most unique aspect of human life is that we're all desperately concerned about proving that our existence matters.
What are you desperate to be, though? I mean, you're
I'm desperate to
immersing
matter.
yourself in other people's problems. Are you seeing some sort of almost salvation, some sort of transport in being involved in people's problems?
Well, I would like it to be said that when I die, from an external point of view, that it mattered that Harry Chapin was alive. From an internal point of view, I want to be able to say what my two grandfathers are able to say. One who just died last summer, and who at 88, and he said about 3 weeks before he died, he said, "You know, Harry, all my life I've wanted to be a painter, and you know what I've been? I've been a painter. And some days I've gone to bed tired with what I call a bad tired. I've struggled at the wrong things. When I hit the hay, I toss and turn. Other days, even though I may not have been successful, I go to bed with what I call a good tired. And that is, I've struggled at the right things, and when I hit the hay, I say, take me away. And I sleep the sleep of the dead. I'm 88. You can take me away." And that sense of peace, that sense of having used whatever the little neurons and molecules and electrons and all the things that chemical reactions, electrical reactions that make up a human being, is to me, since I don't believe in the afterlife, I wish I could. Every time I desperately approach religions to say, do I believe now? I still don't. But that sense of peace that Jim Chapin, my grandfather, was a painter, achieved, and my other grandfather, Kenneth Burke, who just turned 80, and he has it. And God Almighty, what a seductive concept! That in your own life you can, use it to the extent. That's where the "when in doubt, do something" comes from. So the combination is, number one, have a whole kind of personal affirmation that I've used the things, and then to reassure myself that all these struggles have been at least noteworthy of others' attention.
About marriage, just stop you there. What does marriage mean to you? You were talking about.
Well, it's the ultimate political union.
It's politics and money so far. Does your wife ever worry when she hears you come up with these songs, particularly the ones orientated towards the breakdown of relationships? Does she ever worry and think, what have I got hold of here?
Well, I think she'd be crazy not to realize that, and she does. I mean, frankly, she's far wiser than I am. She was married before. As a matter of fact, we had 3 kids by her marriage, and then 2 by the normal methods, and they're all mine now. But no, the fact is that the most key thing about a good marriage is that you can fight and come back the next day. If you haven't got built into your marriage some system by which to work out grievances, then by God you're in terrible trouble. You're just not going to last, because okay, the glow will last a year or 2, and then you're going to have guilt will get you another year. But by then it's all teeth and nails. And as a matter of fact, I think the most important quality in a marriage is respect. Because if you have respect of your mate, you can constantly re-fall in love with them. If you just love them but you don't respect them, the minute you fall out of love, it's over, gone, finista. But you should fall in love. But if you have love and respect, okay, I guarantee you, if you're married for any length of time, there are going to be times when you don't love your wife or your husband. But if you respect them, and you respect the space that they take up and the kind of priorities they have,
right,
you can constantly be re-seduced into it, and that's what makes it meaningful.
What about the Taxi? What about Taxi? I mean, how this fits into the marriage thing. Are you at all a sad person? I mean, that struck me as a very sad song. It was raining, I believe. I mean, it had all the elements of everybody's depression in that song.
Well, I've been accused of writing a lot of depressing songs. I guess that was the first one that everybody heard, and I guess, in fact, it's probably true. But again, it goes back to that sense of recognition. When you're feeling good, it's the last time in the world you need other people. I mean, you can just wander down the street or take your skateboard or your surfboard and get on a wave and just float away. The time you need communication is when things aren't going well. The time you need that sense of communion or a sense of somebody else in the same boat. Anybody who's gone to one of my concerts, even though I sing sad song after sad song sometimes, even though some happy songs, does not go out depressed. Number one, I'm usually quite a positive person. I was born that way. The fact is, however, that the times that I am most pushed to create are when I'm trying to come to terms with some of the things that tend to crunch those positive things and try to, in the act of encompassing them, defeat them. And so Taxi really is about a guy and a gal, both who have sold out their dreams. But in that sense of recognition, even though, he's flying so high when he's stoned at the end of the song, other people listening to that song hopefully make the next step.
With the benefit concerts, how do you decide which subject you're going to go for, which charity is going to benefit? Because you appear to have a thing against political structure. You seem to be rather worried about the way in which people can manipulate the system.
I try to manipulate it like hell myself.
Well, you were also talking about the world hunger thing, which is a very obvious thing. It's very obvious that a lot of assistance is needed in that line. How do you decide?
Well, what I've tried to do is to support specific people and get to know the things and be involved in how that money is spent. World Hunger Year, I'm a founding member of. We do not send $1 for relief, not because we're not interested in feeding hungry children, because we don't feel it. It's like, okay, I'll give you a perfect example I use an awful lot when I'm lobbying in Washington. You've got a dirty linen factory. Now, the question is whether you just clean the linen and send it back to the factory so it gets dirty again, or you ask why it's being dirtied in the first place. I would rather spend my money stopping the linen getting dirty than to keep washing it. There's a whole side of our economic structure, our world economic structure, would love the people of Britain and the United States to take as their job to feed the hungry people around the world. And by the way, they're not just over there. In America, 10% of Americans go to bed hungry at night. 1 out of every 4 or 5 cans of dog and cat food sold in American supermarkets goes to old people who eat it themselves. And folks, the ratio of hungry people in Great Britain is not that different. And these are, the two most civilized, quote, countries in the world. The fact is that it is very simple. If you are willing to believe that an individual can have an impact and are willing in a cognitive sense, using your brains and saying, I really want to have an impact, and say that I'm willing to commit a couple hours a week, not just this week and next week, but next year and 10 years from now, you will see tremendous differences occur. The two most important men in human history, at least in the last 2,000 years, are two guys with unprovable assumptions, Jesus Christ and Karl Marx. One was a guy running around on the fringes of the Roman Empire saying that there's an afterlife, and he wasn't able to prove it. Maybe some people say he was able to prove it by his own death, but that's unprovable. The second guy was a guy, half-crazy guy, going from the slums of London back and forth to Germany and writing these books. And yet, without those two people, you pull them out of human history, and all of a sudden it looks incredibly different.
Well, I'm going to walk round all the arguments you've thrown up with that one, and go back to your music with, like, Dogtown.
Yep.
Which underlines your feeling for people who suffer.
Yep.
In a strange sort of way. How did Dogtown come about?
Dogtown is a song about extreme loneliness. I've never been a woman. I've never made love to a dog, although some people have accused me of it. The fact is that if you go up to that old ruin of a town, it's about an hour's ride north of Boston. If you were doing it the way they did back then in a carriage or a horse, it'd probably be a day's ride. You see these old granite foundations sitting on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And it's one of the most desolate spots in the world. The day I went, it was raining. It was sort of like a typical English day, if you will. And I suddenly had a vision of what it must have been like for a woman left behind by her husband, newly after she was married. And he's going off on a voyage that at best would take a year, probably take 2 years. And she's standing there 6 months after he's supposed to come back. There's no sign of him. And she's left behind with a giant black dog and all the urges of humanity. What do you do? Well, that's what the song's about. I try to write songs where humanity is under stress. People have had their dreams and their expectations coming into conflict with realities. And not necessarily all of them are solving all the problems that come up. All of the people that I write about are desperately questing towards life, just as I am. I have found maybe some more socially acceptable ways of questing.
Are you desperate, though?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm hungry.
Is that because you've already achieved something? I mean, you obviously have now a happy family life. You obviously are financially set. You've achieved enough that I'm sure the cynics that you must draw like a magnet on
No,
certain occasions. They must aim at you the point, well, he's okay. What's he about? And then you say you're desperate.
I think all of us should be very hungry, very greedy, because the only thing we know for sure is we're alive now. And if we don't take it now, we're going to lose. To me, the real sins are the sins of omission, not of commission. In other words, I never want to be 65 and say, I wish that I had done this. To me, that is the most sad admission that any human being could make. And so to me, what scares the bejesus out of me is to feel like, I wrote a poem in my poetry book about I once saw a girl when I was 17 years old in a subway car. And I knew in my 17-year-old brain that this was the girl of all girls. I had a guitar in one hand, I had a suitcase in the other, and the subway was set up in New York so that the seats, everybody had a seat. There was nobody standing up. So if I walked across that subway car and made a pass at her or talked to her, it would have been very embarrassing in the sense that everybody knew what I was doing. And my motivations at 17 were not to be embarrassed. So I sat there and I watched, and she got off at the next stop. And as the door closed, she looked back at me. She sort of smiled, sort of a little tiny smile, and nodded. And at that moment, I knew that I had made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. I don't know where she is. I've never seen her again. Just an example. I want to have very few of those moments in my life.
Well, you've achieved the material things. That sounds rude, but would you agree that you have acquired...
Far more than I ever thought I would.
Are you looking for probably the most elusive of qualities? Are you looking for personal power?
Well, power is a cheap version of feeling that you matter. There's all kinds of ways you can achieve it. Richard Nixon had power, but it was straw in his mouth, cotton in his mouth, soon after he'd done it because of the methodology. So I would say, and frankly, one of the interesting things, there's a whole degree of cynicism that comes up about a whole bunch of different areas. One, about ego. We've gotten to a time where if a person has a healthy ego and applying it in healthy ways, we say, hey, put them down. Or professionalism. In my business, if you are somebody who really loves the craft of writing and of singing, putting together things, you're looked askance at because you're supposed to be in a business where your emotions are going through from a seething cauldron and spit out pure, and that is the Lord is sitting on your shoulder spitting lightning bolts in your ears, and that's where it's coming from, rather than a process. But the great creators were people who were in love with all of the, we just were up to Stratford last week and reading, Anthony Burgess's book on Shakespeare. And the extraordinary thing about that man was that he was an ordinary guy who had a genius, but he was worried about money, he was worried about this and that, he was worried about getting a coat of arms, and he loved to get his piece of ass now and then, and he loved, he's alive, he was hungry, he was feeling. Bach, the greatest composer of all time, he'd go to work every day, he'd write genius music at his church, and some guy'd call him up, hey, Bach, listen, the Queen's cousin is coming down to the court, we got 46 shekels, she loves flutes, would you write me something with a lot of flutes in it, will you? About 20 minutes long. Say, well, 46 shekels, 20 minutes? No, I'll give you 10 minutes for it. Okay, 15, you got a deal, Bach. Then he'd go home, and he'd drink beer, he'd screw his wife, he had 23 kids, and he'd go to sleep, and then the next day he'd go to work and write genius music again. This whole thing of this artiste, all that stuff. One of the things that we do to our young people is we scare the bejesus out of them. We set it up that, that an artist has to be, either killing themselves, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, or that they've got to have some, extraordinary passion rather than just decent, normal human ego, a concern for the craft that they do, and those two things interfacing. By God, it works out perfectly. What I'm saying is that an awful lot of us are frightened away from our dreams because, what the
But you've
English...
got to have the basics there. Your popularity is because of your ambition and ambition is part of your ability, and your ability was given to you by your parents?
No. I have met 100 people with talent to everyone with determination. And the irony is...
Yeah, but Mr. Tanner lost out, didn't he? I mean, he didn't quite have enough going.
Well,
when
but
the
the
chips were
problem
down.
with him is he was protecting himself. See, he grew up in an environment, so his one shot at the big time blew him away. My advice to Mr. Tanner was that he should have started earlier and gone to New York earlier if he
He
was
shouldn't have gone
serious.
for the big one.
Or, no, and then go, so he got bombed. So he takes it, learns some other things. You know, the greatest lesson of anybody, I think, in human history, the greatest single clarifying element is a person called Richard Milhous Nixon. Now, here is a man with little charm, little integrity, little vision, only a small amount of intelligence in a clever way, but not in a broad sense.
Does he speak so highly of you?
And by dint of one quality that is available to everybody, sheer blind determination, got to the highest elective office known in the universe, the presidency of the United States. He went through such humiliations. I mean, in '62, when he lost the governorship of California, 2 years after he lost the presidency of the United States after being president running against Kennedy, you couldn't have elected him dog catcher. And yet, 6 years later, he was elected president. And 4 years after that, got the highest plurality in the history of American elections. I'm not saying he's a great man, anything but. But by dint of that determination, it's a lesson to every one of us. If all of us believe as strongly in our vision as that man believed in his paltry vision, then we have got no excuse but that we should be prime minister.
Does corruption fascinate you? Do you ever admire corruption?
No, but I admire passion. I'm not a Johnny One-Note. I'm very involved in hunger. I'm very involved in politics. I'm very involved. I mean, no, this isn't my little pet charity. I mean, that's not where my head is at. To me, I would love to feel when I am dead that I've had a sway on certain things. I think every one of us would. And the ironic thing is, a perfect example is Ralph Nader. Here's a guy who just went to law school and is probably one of the, he's always number 1, 2, or 3 in the most admired Americans. And by dint of his commitment to something larger than himself, thus he becomes larger. Thus he gets more rewards, not in a monetary sense, because he takes less than $8,000 a year. I mean, so many of us are so dumb. I mean, what the hell do I want with a limousine? What the hell do I want with a Learjet or a yacht? I mean, if I really wanted one, I could get one, and if it would really make me happy, it would work out fine. But I'm afraid I'm not that simple-minded. I really don't believe it.
One thing that sprung to mind when you were talking about Harry Chapin, as if he was sitting next to you, do you like him?
I like him a good deal of the time, and when I don't like him, I kick him in the ass and try to get him over where I like him. And I'm lucky that way, because I got a family around me who is not awed by me at all. They're all people that do as many creative things as I do, if not more. My wife is very willing to tell me I'm a damn idiot. But I try to write as qualitative music as I can, and just do it with as much belief as I can, and if I don't believe it, change it, and integrate that with my family life, integrate that with my political feelings, and my business sense. All of this stuff is making sense. It's integrating. It's making a life that, to me, is terribly exciting. And I can't ask for anything more than that, except that, by God, let's keep it going. When you want something done, there's an old saw, ask a busy man. Well, I'm trying to be a busy man, and I'm trying to get some things done. And by God, it's exciting. I mean, this whole English adventure over the last year. Last November, the first time I really came over with the idea that I was going to start making an investment to be an entity in England and Ireland and Scotland. And I came over again in February. I came over again in April and did 4 concerts in Manchester, London, and in Dublin and Belfast. I came again in June and July, did some European TV stuff and Germany stuff. Then I'm back here in the fall doing 10 concerts, 8 concerts, whatever it is, and I'll be back again next spring. And the whole thing, irrespective of, the almighty hit or the almighty, all those things that are the standard things you have to supposedly mark yourself by, it's happening. And that's because I'm doing something that I believe in. It's something that's different. It's got a shape. It's got a vision. There are people like you who have believed in me for a lot of years. and you're sort of famous for your ears. In some cases, I guess you made mistakes. Maybe I'm one of them, but I appreciate the fact that you've given voice to me. See, one of the extraordinary things about many people in the entertainment business, like myself, we don't realize how important our ambassadors are. Everything from the promotion men and salesmen, and most especially, the music directors and the disc jockeys and the stations, who really give us voice. Because without that whole incredible electronic multiplying effect does not occur. WOLD is a song that really was triggered by Taxi, ironically enough, and that's because after Taxi came out, my record company sent me all around the country to meet disc jockeys. And there were three types. There were the young comers who saw the world ahead of them as a giant apple ready to be juicily bitten into. There were the guys in their prime who sort of stood astride the business, like you do here in the British Isles. And there were the older guys who were holding on by their fingernails, desperately trying to continue to relate, 45 going on 15. And I met a bunch of those, and that was, to me, the ultimate, example of, okay, we all go there. The question is, how do we continue relating?
One of the songs I really do like is The Bananas.
That has been such a...
I'm very interested in cars, trucks, whatever. I think it's lovely. The bit I really do like in it, having sort of had the odd accident, thankfully not on the road, but on race circuits and things, is the bit where he says Christ. And he calls out the only name. Funny how he called out the only name that could help. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, ironically enough, when I wrote that as a poem, and it was a comment on basically Vietnam body counts. I mean, we get so involved with statistics, and we don't think of the human story behind it. So it was a piece of black comedy. The point is very simple. The song seems to have a kind of bizarre life force within its craziness. But the original urge was very simple. I was coming through Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1965. An elderly gentleman did get in and tell me the story of this event. And to put a weird little kicker on it, to show you how life can come around double-edged, I got a call about 2 years ago from a lawyer who was calling for the sister of the guy who was killed. And he had no legal basis to ask me. He said, "You're coming to Scranton. They're using Bananas very much on the radio as a commercial for the concert. Would you please ask him to stop it?" And she asked me to tell you one thing. The only two times she's seen her parents cry were one when their son was killed, my brother, and the other time was when his two children came home from school when all the kids in school were singing that song at him. Now, all of a sudden, my whole vision of the song radically changed at that moment, because you suddenly realize, okay, if you are a person like myself writing from real life, you suddenly find yourself in a strange way kicking people you didn't mean to kick at all. Matter of fact, I went and visited the family and talked to them, and I said I wasn't trying to hurt them, and that indeed that night I wouldn't do it just for them, but I would be doing the song in the future, and I didn't feel that it was meant as any disrespect. The other irony was, at another concert in Illinois, Normal, Illinois, of all places, I sang a song called Sniper, which I'm very proud of. I think it's one of the best things I've done. And halfway through the song, a distinguished gentleman with a beard sitting in the third row jumped up and ran out, and evidently in some distress. And I asked about it later, and nobody knew until I asked one person who was also older and said, "Oh, didn't you know that was the head of the English department here, whose son was killed by that sniper?" The guy Charles Whitmore in Texas. And he became an alcoholic for about 3 years, was absolutely, an absolute wreck, and pulled himself back together and worked himself, and he's a fantastic teacher and this and the other. Well, I feel very strongly about that song. I think it captures something that for 15 years we've been seeing more and more of.
Did you have any contact with him?
No, I wasn't able to. But here's an example where if you are trying to write serious material, and it's amazing how you can sometimes really have an impact that you didn't necessarily want to have. In general, I have to say that sense of recognition that I aim for in the human spirit, and by the way, I mean, frankly, Harry Chapin is the villain of almost all his songs. I'm not writing from a superior point of view, and especially the male-female relationships. It's usually I'm always the blind one who's myopic and doing something dumb at this point or the other. And frankly, I give that as a lesson to young songwriters. If you're going to say something nice about somebody, make it about somebody else in your songs. And if you're going to say something nasty, make it about yourself. And automatically people will trust you more because they know that you're not just trying to do a puff bit. You know, during the 60s, I used to write a lot of songs about how I was such a wonderful stud or something. And by God, I used to bomb every time. People only started listening when they realized what a fool I was. The fact is, I've got the best job in the world. And I am frightened that someday somebody's going to wake me up and say, Harry, we found you out. You have to go take a real job now. Because I've got the best job. I make an awful lot of money. I have a tremendous ego gratification from an awful lot of people. I define my own product. I'm not selling toilet paper that people wanted before. Nobody wanted Chapin music before I did it. I define the times I work, the places I work, and I can do a tremendous amount of, if I do a qualitative job, of seducing people with some of my ideas. Fantastic gig.